Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. This week, we are going to be discussing the archetype of the Father in Gene Key 40, which brings us from the shadow of exhaustion to the city of divine will by way of the gift of resolve. And I'm very excited about this one because we have now graduated into the ring of alchemy, which is in many ways the heart of the process here of lunar alchemy, as we are contemplating these transits as they move through our cosmic potentials, and we are transmuting those potentials through our bodies into a lived physical experience here on the planet, thus utilizing the energies of the sun, moon, and earth together to fuel our individual evolution. So, a hearty welcome to absolutely everybody here, and thank you for joining us. So, I feel like there's, oh yes, and of course, Gene Key 40 does represent the first seal for the 7 seals. So for those of you focusing on the evolution of grace in your own lives or in humanity, this is a fabulous gene key to be present for. So, Bella, the Father is here. Tell us what that means, and why is it related to this particular gene key? How does the Father function in humanity's understanding of spirit, of the universe? What's happening here?
I feel the name of the Father comes from it being a masculine archetype of a community. And in the community, we have the masculine energy that is going out in action, going out and penetrating the world. That is how he acts. And the way that energy is used in this archetype is what it's all about. So either we use life force energy in a way that is aligned with who we are, aligned with our soul, with our spirit, with our intention, I think, as well. And then as we do that in the world, we actually regenerate. So we could say in a human design sense, it's even using your energy in a way so that you regenerate, so that you're actually solving things. The gene key gift frequency here is resolve. So using that masculine energy of action out in the world so that it benefits the whole tribe, everybody around, the whole family. And I think that is the most important thing when it comes to the Father archetype. It cares about how it uses its energy. And in a way, it's a pull to the mother, which in a way is that energy of care that gives with both hands and that has that tenderness that never ends. And here we have a masculine energy that says we have to make sure that we both resolve for ourselves and for the family. I need to make sure that I use my energy in a way so that I have energy tomorrow, so that I can continue to create resolve. So a little bit more about boundaries, and we can speak about what boundaries are and what boundaries aren't. But I would say healthy boundaries are inherent in this archetype because it has to do with how we are using life force. And the way that it's connected with spirit in a simple sense is that when you are using your energy in an aligned way, when you are in alignment, it's also when spirit can come and live in you. When you are in resistance, when you're trying, when you're forcing, I don't believe that breath and spirit can really move through you.
Yeah, so many very interesting connections for this particular gene key. Obviously, the connection to the programming partner, the mother, and what really strikes me about this particular gene key is that it feels like a sequential development of the 34 and the shadow of force. And as we engage with that process, then that leaves us in a state of exhaustion. So this is a really fantastic gene key that has many connections to many other places within the entire potential system that we have been gifted with in this particular body, in this life. And one of the things that kind of excites me about that possibility is that connection that you brought up, Bella, to using our energy through the system of human design. What is our strategy? What is our authority? And when we look at human design, I like to describe the differences between human design and the gene keys as human design describes what we are. And there's really no room for interpretation of that. We are what we are. It's very clear. And then the gene keys allows us to explore how we are. How do we go about being the thing that we are? And when we come to this 40th gene key with the connection to the mother and its deep connection to how we use energy, it really brings into focus that idea of moving into resonance and moving into harmony with the truth of what we are and surrendering ourselves to that reality rather than attempting to become something that we desire to be. And when we do that, that's when we get stuck in that forcefulness, trying to use our willpower to be something that we actually aren't. And that brings up the whole realm of not self for the universe and the world to show up and reflect to us. So this particular gene key, I feel like, it has a very, very unique position amongst all of the gene keys because of how far the reach of this one goes, from the 7 sacred seals to human design to the connections to the other keys that are part of our awareness. So do you have thoughts about that, Bella?
Sometimes I feel it's very cool to speak with somebody who's not just from the beginning into the mechanics of human design, because really what you were just doing here, even with the 34 and speaking about outer force or inner strength, usually a human design person would be like, oh, this is completely different circuitry. One is integration circuitry, which is deeply, deeply individual. And the other one is tribal circuitry, which is very much about the community and how we support each other. So individual empowerment and evolution, and then the tribe where we support each other. It's so different. But really, I feel like the gene keys is actually in one way helping us to see beyond circuitry, to see beyond what we group together and what isn't being grouped together. So I really like when we can understand the mechanics, but we can also go beyond them. And I agree that this gene key is very vast. And also when we think about the elements, we have thunder and we have water, and those are both quite volatile. And then we think about the father and kind of like resolve and doing things for the family. It seems different in a way than what it's made up of. So definitely there is a richness in this key. And somehow what I think is interesting, almost when we go into the mystical part, is that the verb I'm thinking of here, or it's about letting go. So how can resolve and letting go be together? I mean, that for me is something to explore in this conversation and with people in the chat as well, because I feel like that's what we are conditioned to think that we can't do. Those two don't go together, because everything we think is that we have to make an effort to have things go the way we want, or make an effort to finish the work. I mean, that's by our whole society, and people with open roots, for example, you know about that stress of like, I just have to be done with this so that I can go and live or rest or what it is. But really here, when there is something with this archetype that have us explore, that when we let go of the outcome, when we let go of the future, when we let go of the task and let energy move through us, that's actually when we open up for more, the floodgate for more energy to come through, and aligned energy that takes us forward, not through force, but through that inner alignment and an inner strength that comes out in the world in a natural way.
Such a beautiful way to weave together these understandings. And I love what you're sharing about, because for me, what it really brings into focus is this concept, this idea, this awareness of and possibility of free will. And when we begin to really look at free will through this gene key, it really carries us to the depths of human fear, which is essentially that our experience of life on one level is completely meaningless because we are totally alone in the universe without any reflective energy of something that we might call God or divinity or essentially meaning. And when we consider this idea that there is no such thing as free will, there's only divine will, then we're either moving in harmony with divine will or we're moving out of harmony with divine will, which then paradoxically gives us the impression that we're actually exercising our free will. Whereas at the same time, if we desire to have any type of experience of harmony through our lives, our bodies, the only choice we can make is in harmony with divine will, which includes all of the choices which are quote unquote not in harmony with divine will. We just get into this like unending circle of like, which side of this paradox are we on right now? And when we are experiencing this form of harmony through our awareness, it really, to me, kind of brings into question what is the purpose of this deep, deep fear driving this particular energy in our experience. And as it becomes present, as we become aware of it, where can it lead us to? And when we talk about those elements of thunder over water, I have this feeling that perhaps there's an element of this fear driving this entire gene key that we can actually see within the elements of the gene key, within the trigrams. And I haven't considered this fully, and Bella, I would love to invite you to share any perspective you have on that, or please take us in a new direction as well, if that's what you feel inspired by.
Now Richard speaks about the will to surrender, and here we are in the ego, in the heart center, where it's all about will and willpower. And I'm thinking, at our level of awareness, I definitely feel like there is something active, like we're speaking of this masculine archetype, the father. And I'm thinking about, for example, when you go to a ceremony, could be plant medicine, doesn't even have to be any kind of medicine. The fact that you go there, it's an act of will. You know, you end up there usually because you have decided that you want to sit in that circle of people. And I do believe that somehow we can consciously engage, because this is the tribal circuitry again, and I feel like we can collectively and individually and in groups, which is part of what we are doing here with Lunar Alchemy and the inner circle, we can create those circles, for example, or environments or containers where actually we are starting to allow that surrender, starting to go to those places. So maybe still the act of will as a human being, then of course in what happens once we surrender, we don't know. That's only God knows. But that's what I'm feeling into. That's because it is the ego center. It seems like there is still this voluntary determination to create surrender and to role model surrender, or to surrender together. And I see here in the group as well, like many people are coming together around the 7 sacred seals. I feel that's happening more now than 10 years ago. Even the people that I knew quite a lot of people, maybe not 10 years ago, but 7 years ago, when a lot of things started to happen online. And I didn't hear that much around the 7 sacred seals. And that is the mystery school. And a mystery school cannot be done with a mind. So that here we have people coming together saying, we're ready to let go of something that we don't need anymore, so that we can allow God to guide us, or spirit to flow through us, however you want to name it.
Yeah, this idea of surrender in relationship to the Father is one of the driving concepts between so many religious creations throughout humanity's history. And it's really interesting to consider that energy around gatherings, as at one point in human history, the primary gatherings were around temples, churches, places of worship on one level or another, and where people would experience some form of communion with the divine, no matter how that was defined. And what I could see kind of starting to bubble up out of our awareness in the collective of humanity is this opportunity for us to begin gathering in new forms of surrender. Rather than surrendering to a dogma, we begin to surrender to the experience of the collective group. And as we do that, I believe that we'll begin to better understand the individual role that we have to play. Because if we are constantly alone, if we always separate ourselves from being a part of the collective, we'll never really receive a full reflection of that role that a large aspect of us may be here to play. And that actually prevents us from harmonizing with the divine will that maybe we're built for. And along that same line of thinking, if we never take time to be alone to connect with our own inner charge, our own flow of inner energy, we'll never be able to connect to that flow of energy moving through us because of the constant distractions of being part of a group. And this idea of groups coming together and many of us beginning to explore this pathway between embodying the shadow frequencies and embodying the gift frequencies, and allowing the awareness of these experiences to kind of wash over us and clear out the conditioning and shift our perspective about the experiences that we've already created in our lives to sort of design this form of personality that we like to identify with. It's like this crazy alchemy of events across time are happening to almost lead us in the direction of what I think, what I would like to say as destiny, where when we look at destiny and fate from these different perspectives, destiny is in harmony with divine will, whereas fate is the consequences of the use of what we might term free will within a structure of karma. And I think that's a wonderful contemplation for each of us to really consider about what is the role that we have in groups, and what is that our need for aloneness, and how do we focus our awareness during those various experiences so that we can really find that harmony that we may have been searching for, or seeking, I think is maybe a better word in relation to this particular gene key, because of the element of seeking the divine through our experience. Do you have
said before surrender to the Father, and how that is part of religion, and I feel that part of the courage that's coming in the new frequencies that are arriving to Earth is actually for the Father to surrender. And I think that in the dark ages and in so many years of struggle and force in many ways, the masculine in women and in men, but in the masculine archetype, was forced to survive, was forced to work, was forced to even exhaust himself for survival, for his family, for that support. And now we are asked to kind of take off the old costumes. And I feel like first now, maybe we are at a point where we can have this surrender of the masculine pole also to the feminine pole. And, you know, we see that this in the 21 and the 48, which the 21 is part of the tribal circuitry again, and it's the more masculine part, and the 48 is the more feminine, and that has more to do with feeling into form, whereas the 21 is more about stepping up into our true authority. And I feel like in true authority we also have the surrender, so there has to be both the being able to go out and resolve and to act in the world, and also to come home and surrender to essence, to what is. And we are, I believe, at a point where we are ready for more of the balancing or the integration of polarities, of poles within one system, within one being, one organism, one human being, one heart. And for me, that's important. So the Father surrendering, and not only living one part of him.
Yeah, I love that idea, because then what it begins to look like is dynamism manifested through the masculine, which, when we look at the history of that masculine role, in some ways of perceiving it, it was anything but dynamic. It was rigid. Even though the activity itself, the outer external impact, has been extraordinarily dynamic. But that inner world, not so much, much more rigid, much more structural, much more defined, and less available to the waters of movement that are presented by the feminine opportunity of expression. And when we look at that on an internal basis for both men and women, it really opens up this incredible potential and possibility for experiencing and understanding a different way of relating to our own survival. One of the things that has struck me for a very long time about this process of developing prosperity in our experience, and in particularly the more prosperous countries, is the degree to which that fear of non-survival still governs the experience of prosperity for many people, regardless of the level of wealth that they reach. And I think I'm starting to reference one of the gene keys that talks about this, and I can't really remember which one it is, around that sort of fear of losing connection to the flow, which is where prosperity, the idea of prosperity, I believe, really truly comes from. And on an internal level, it's like, oh, how can we survive by doing nothing? And I think there's a lot of movements happening across society and expressions that are happening around human activity and the fear of the changes that are before us, about how we're going to lose connection to our inner divinity, where, for instance, machines and AI replaces the need for humanity. And it's like, when we look at that on the external, where does that leave the human connection for divinity? And all of these other ways in which our societies are currently built, from the more feminine roles, the more masculine roles, how do we begin to build a new way of relating with each other that allows for the surrender of the Father as an inherent aspect of how we show up for ourselves and how we show up for our community, our families, our countries, whatever it is that looks like. It just feels like this incredibly vast space of almost unexplored experience, at least on a collective level. Bella, would you like to look at the elements? Do you have more thoughts on this masculine feminine relationship?
There's just one more thing about the archetype name. I know that we were looking at the name Homecoming when we were looking at the Father, which would have been more of that balanced pole, I guess, when it comes together. And somehow, I guess, with the archetypes, they are in a high frequency already, so they don't really express much of the shadow. They are more in the essence of the gift. And somehow it still felt like it's easier to put on the costume of the Father than to put on the costumes of Homecoming. But definitely, I do feel it is when the family comes home. And that's really when we are coming into that wholeness. And again, it's not only with men that have had to force and exhaust themselves. I mean, I see that possibly even more the 50, 60 last years after the Second World War. It has been women that has taken on much of that role while still maintaining the traditional role of the household and the kids. So for all of us, in order for us to surrender, we need to be able to include not only the active, but also the receptive for all of us. So Homecoming, I believe, is that, again, we often speak in Lunar Alchemy about union and sacred union. So the union of the poles coming back into integration of those. But yeah, let's look at the.
Yeah, I love that word as well in relationship to this particular energy frequency, just because it really does kind of brings a little bit of extra awareness to our individual experience that is somewhat separated from our conditioned experience of the Father, whether that's our individual family fathers or the Father that's the head of the religions that we were brought up through, or whatever it is. Really, really nice.
Yeah, so here we come back to what I said in the beginning, with something that almost feels traditional in it when we speak about, again, tribal circuitry, supporting each other, family, Father. And then we see here that we have thunder over water, and water is very volatile. Water over water is the 29th gene key and the archetype of the water goddess. And then we have thunder over thunder, which is gene key 51 and the initiator. So here we have, like I say, it's very telling, I feel, with those two, that there is a lot of dynamism. You were speaking about that before, John. And what you can see here in the braid that is created is that we have 29, half-heartedness, commitment, devotion, and then here 51, agitation, initiative, and awakening. So the 40 is a combination, we could say. So in the shadow frequency, exhaustion is agitated, half-heartedness. Gift frequency, resolve, is initiating commitment. I really like that one. And then the acidic frequency, divine will is the awakened devotion. And they speak about this as thunder that brings the clearing rain. So here you can use your own imagination. You could also think about the ocean, because I live in Florida and it's hurricane season. So very often when you go to the ocean, you're going to see far away the clouds, and you're going to see the thunderstorms and the lightnings far away over the horizon or over the water, and maybe even rainbows. So that could also be a way of thinking about this homecoming, and also here flow effortlessly like water to experience the energy of spirit. And that goes back to what we said in the beginning, to be in alignment. And in alignment, you can think about your chakras. In alignment, you can think about different parts of you, the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, being aligned. And that is really how the energy can flow through, and how spirit can be in the breath through you, spirit in every breath, you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this image, because when we consider deliverance, we can see the spark of thunder, this crack of electricity. And it's like the initiation of the flow of water that comes out of our atmosphere and comes down to the ground. And when there is a massive flow of that water, what we often see is, whether it's flooding or not, we see these pathways of the flow of water opening up new places on the earth. New paths are sort of like are of flow, are allowed to manifest as the water moves the earth and creates these, gullies or expands creeks or rivers or whatever it is. And when we bring that idea in relationship with the ocean, then we have this whole movement of water that is in an unending flow, of flowing from the clouds down to the ground, and then flowing through the rivers and the streams, and sometimes the flood pathways that allow that water to then return into the complete ocean. And it's like, this is the perfect imagery to describe what does it mean to be a spiritual seeker. What is it that we're seeking after? Is essentially to return to the ocean. And yet, without that thunder crack, without that awakening of awareness inside of us, that we could actually connect to this flow that will guide us back to the ocean, that pathway is never going to be experienced or walked or sort of engaged with. And so when we look at this possibility of where do these elements live within our bodies? Obviously, we have our bodies are filled with water. And when we look at this element of fire, there's two forms that take a primary focus of our physical bodies. The first is the electrical from our brains. And then the other is like the digestive fire of our system of digesting food and our experiences, integrating the wisdom from that. And as we kind of examine how do we find our individual flow, then it brings to mind, Richard talks in the 64 Ways a great deal about the role of excess on this particular experience of the gene key. And when we think about our physical bodies and the role that excess has, our current society is essentially the definition of excess. Our minds have an excess of entertainment, an excess of distraction. Our bodies have an excess of food. Many of us, the vast majority of human beings who live in prosperous countries, we have more food in our refrigerators and our freezers and in our grocery stores and available to us at just, restaurants and everywhere. We have far more food than we actually need to survive. And there's even the culture of we might essentially call it a form of gluttony, of just consuming to the point of excess, whether that's food or consumer products, the things that we engage with in the world, whether they're material objects or, it kind of sometimes blows me away when I consider the way that our economy is driven. In the United States, for instance, the humongous role of the manufacture of new cars. It's like, how many people are there? How many cars do we actually need to manufacture before everybody's got enough cars in the world? And it's kind of this interesting idea of how are we engaging with excess, and can we find our individual flow that's truly in harmony with divine will, even when that involves a really large flow of whether it's energy, money, material goods. Where do we find that connection? And how do we engage with it in a way that allows us to draw the wisdom from our individual circuitry and contribute in a meaningful way to the collective? So Bella, what sorts of, I don't know if we've reached the moment of concluding thoughts or ideas that you would like to share about the Father or the elements or where we are in our discussion, but I wish to open the floor.
Yeah, if we have any questions, you can definitely ask them in the chat or in the Q&A. With what you said in the last few minutes, I feel simply that excess is always going to lead to exhaustion. And maybe we don't see it right away, but within a closed system, that's always what's going to happen. And I know that Richard also speaks about acidity, and that's what I'm thinking. Even with all these cars, they are not biodegradable. So it's not like tomorrow they are all back to soil again. And definitely the same thing with the body, and that acidity of the stomach that's also connected to the ego center through human design and understanding the circuitry, and how when we are putting in things in our body, which is not only food, it's also, I can't watch anything, I don't watch television, and I can't even watch movies that have violence because it stays in me and I can't digest it, and it creates a kind of acidity, literal or the felt sense of acidity in my system. So definitely, and what we can't digest. I don't know if I said that right, but the things that we cannot digest, they are going to stay in the body and affect the cells. So this is also, you can speak more in a biological sense about how acidity leads to cancer, but even just more symbolic, even when it's something emotional that we can't digest, that we can't get on the other way of, it's going to affect the way our cells work in the body. It's going to numb certain parts. And when we aren't alive, when the energy can't flow, when spirit and energy isn't able to go everywhere, that's when we create those pockets that then can lead to, for example, cancer, which is the big pandemic that we have on this planet right now. So definitely to check that excess that's there and know that it's going to lead to exhaustion. And it's going to, it seems like for us right now, that symptom of how cells are growing in excess, in our bodies when we can't digest.
Yeah, looking at cancer through the lens of acidity and the excess growth of cellular reproduction, it really begins to take on a form that we can look at and go like, oh, this stuff truly is energetic in nature. And I think it really also brings into that concept of how are we digesting our experience? What are the free will choices we're making about what we're going to digest? Which experiences are we choosing? Not from the standpoint of which events are we choosing, but from the standpoint of what is the experience that we are choosing. And this particular idea certainly brings us into a very deep inner process of transmuting our conditioning, of transmuting our reactionary tendencies. And it really just opens a humongous pathway of both self-development and collective engagement. And yeah, I really very much appreciate this connection to the physical body from this gene key, because it's so incredibly cosmic in nature. On one way of looking at what is the nature of divinity, where does divinity even come from, what is the human being's connection to divinity, and then we get to explore it even through our bodies, and how this process of integration of our experience leads to various expressions of our physical bodies, and how our choices can actually influence that expression in ways that become more and more harmonious to the destiny of our being. Really, really fantastic.
And the very last thing that comes in, which is just like a sentence, I feel when we look at this gene key, where the fear dissolves is really that in surrendering, the essential can never die. What's essential is always going to stay there. So in one way or the other, somehow the will to surrender, with that knowing that the essential can never go away. The excess, or how do you say that can fall away, and that doesn't serve us. But the essential, the truth, that's going to be there, because that's God, that's spirit, that's, and often I feel that, maybe I have thought more about it as truth, truth, like it can never die. What really is real and true can never die. And here, what I feel is, the essential. There is something where the 40 really asks us to go back to what's essential, the essence of things. And that's there, that's intact, that's always going to stay intact, no matter how much we die to it, how much we surrender to it.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful place to conclude our discussion, because it, as I'm watching some of the comments come by, we can really begin to see how incredibly individual we can experience this energy through our own systems. And that individuality gets tied together into the collective that we are as a group. And for those of you who are new to Lunar Alchemy, I just want to say again, welcome to this discussion. So very grateful for your presence here and your contributions in the chat. If you have returned to the discussions and are enjoying them, we hope that you will continue joining us. We are going to transition into our quantum elemental energetic transmission, which essentially is a frequency package delivered to each of us through our solar membership on Unlock Your Design with Lunar Alchemy. and it allows our energies to connect with the essence, essentially, of the elemental expression that is coming through the current solar transit. And in doing so, what we achieve is a transmutation, an alchemy of the energies which are set in motion by our connection with the moon and with the conditioning that we take on and the body of our being that we create as a result of these experiences. And so you can use this same link Bella just posted in the chat to join our future discussions. Our regular discussion is on Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern. We follow each of the transits, so please rejoin us. If you desire, you can engage in solar membership with us, have access to downloads of the transmissions and our discussions to keep for yourself, to experience these energetic shifts multiple times, whether these are energies that are part of your chart or they are something that you happen to be focusing on because you are drawn to that energy in some form or another. They are incredibly individual experiences with this energy and can produce very powerful shifts within our beings, and as a new contribution to the collective, and always provide insight as to how we can come into greater flow with our individual natures. So thank you all for joining us. I'm sending loving presence from my heart to yours, and we will look forward to seeing you in a future discussion. May you enjoy the rest of this transit through exhaustion and resolve and divine will. Perhaps you will have the blessing of connecting with that lightning spark that connects you to the flow back to the ocean that we have all come from. So we'll look forward to seeing you in a future discussion. Have a beautiful day, and we will connect with our solar members in our transmission room. All right.